It was 11:47 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday when my phone lit up in the dark. No ringtone, no vibration, just the cold glow of a notification from an email address I hadn't seen in years. My sister, Rachel. No subject line, no greeting, just a link to an upscale baby registry and one sentence beneath it. I know you're doing well now. We expect a $6,000 contribution for the nursery. Don't be small about this. Before I tell you how that single sentence unraveled years of lies and exposed a carefully staged illusion, take a second to support this channel. Hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps stories like this reach people who need to hear them. 5 years ago, that message would have broken me. I would have stared at the screen shaking, wondering how my own blood could speak to me like I was an ATM instead of a human being. Back then, I still believed that if I just explained myself better, loved harder, stayed quieter, they might finally treat me with decency. But the woman who cried on the bathroom floor begging for dignity doesn't exist anymore. She didn't survive the day my husband looked at me with clinical disgust and called me an animal. I remember that afternoon with painful clarity. I was 24, pregnant, and battling a severe medical condition that turned every day into a physical war. I couldn't keep food down. Standing made me dizzy. Smells sent me running to the bathroom. Our small apartment smelled like crackers and antiseptic wipes because that's all my body could tolerate. The place was messy because I was barely surviving. When Caleb, my husband, came home, he didn't see a woman carrying his child. He saw an inconvenience. He nudged an empty snack wrapper with his shoe and looked down at me curled on the couch. "You look like you've completely given up," he said calmly. No anger. No yelling, just disappointment sharp enough to cut. "You look disgusting." And my sister laughed. Rachel was sitting across the room in a tight designer dress, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. She didn't defend me. She joined him. "I could never let myself go like that," she said lightly, smoothing her hair. "Pregnancy isn't an excuse to be gross. It's about discipline." That's when I learned something important, though it took years to fully understand it. To betray me, she had to erase my humanity. If she admitted I was a sick, vulnerable woman carrying a child, then what she was about to do would have been unforgivable. So she rewrote the story. I wasn't a sister. I wasn't a wife. I was a problem. A mess. Something easier to step over than face. That was the day she announced she was pregnant too. 3 months along, she claimed. With a boy. Perfectly healthy. Glowing. No nausea. No weakness. She placed her manicured hand on her flat stomach and smiled. "See? This is what it's supposed to look like." Caleb didn't hesitate. He looked at me pale and shaking under a blanket, then at her polished performance of perfection. He made a decision like it was a business deal. He asked for a divorce the next morning. He walked out believing he was upgrading. I was left with silence, sickness, and a truth that took years to accept. They never loved me. They loved what they could extract from me. Attention, compliance, money, sacrifice. So when I stared at Rachel's email demanding $6,000 for a nursery, something inside me didn't shatter. It clicked. She still didn't see me as a person. Just a resource she could tap whenever her fantasy lifestyle started cracking. My finger hovered over the block button. My body reacted before my mind did. Heart racing, palms sweating. The old instinct to disappear. To make myself smaller. To avoid conflict because I had been trained to lose. Then a hand gently covered mine. Mark, my husband now, stood beside me in the kitchen. Calm. Grounded. Reading glasses on. Tablet tucked under his arm. He didn't look confused or angry. He looked analytical. He took my phone without a word and read the message. "I'll just block her," I whispered. "I can't go back into that world." "No," he said quietly. The word wasn't loud, but it was final. "Blocking her suggests she still has power," he said. "She doesn't." He set my phone down and turned his tablet toward me. What I saw wasn't social media. It wasn't gossip. It was a financial profile. Pages of data. Red flags. Numbers that told a very different story than the one Rachel was selling. "I recognize her name," Mark said evenly. "Not because she's your sister. Because she applied for a high-tier credit line with my firm 3 weeks ago." My stomach dropped. "We denied it almost instantly," he continued. She's not wealthy. She's not stable. She's drowning. He looked back at the email. This isn't confidence, he said. It's desperation. I shook my head. She'll escalate. She always does. Mark's expression didn't change. Then we won't hide. He picked up the phone again. We'll go see her. My breath caught. Mark! We're not bringing money, he said calmly. We're bringing something more valuable. 2 weeks later, we pulled up to the gates of Crestview Hills, one of those gated communities that sold prestige but was built on borrowed image. The guard eyed Mark's understated car and waved us through. Rachel's house was big, loud, over-designed, columns that held nothing, a fountain that didn't run. It looked expensive in the way people who don't understand money think expensive looks. She opened the door beaming. You made it, she said, air kissing near my cheek. I was worried you'd feel uncomfortable here. Mark smiled politely. Inside, everything was white leather and glass, beautiful from a distance, cold up close. As I sat down, I noticed a tag under the cushion. Rental. Mark noticed too. Then Caleb walked in. He looked exhausted. Older. Smaller. He didn't meet my eyes. Rachel clapped her hands. So, isn't it perfect? Plenty of space for the baby. She looked at me. Did you bring the contribution? Mark stood. He didn't pull out a check. He pulled out a thick envelope. Rachel's eyes lit up. Go ahead, Mark said calmly. Open it. She tore it open eagerly, and then her face changed. Rachel pulled the contents from the envelope expecting weight, thickness, the reassuring feel of money. Instead, a stack of glossy, stapled documents slid into her hands. She frowned, flipping the first page, then the second. The color drained from her face in stages, like a dimmer switch being turned down too fast. What is this? She asked, her voice suddenly thin. Mark leaned back in his chair like he was settling into a long meeting. That's a consolidated financial statement. A full liability overview. She laughed sharply, but there was panic under it. This isn't funny. Is this some kind of joke? No, he said calmly. It's an audit. She dropped the papers onto the glass table as if they were contaminated. They spread out, numbers and red highlights glaring up like exposed bones. Caleb leaned forward, confusion flashing across his tired face. Rachel, what is he talking about? Rachel's mouth opened, then closed. It's nothing. He's lying. He's trying to scare us. Mark didn't raise his voice. He simply pointed to the summary line at the bottom of the page. Total unsecured debt, he read. $246,000. The room went silent. You have 6 maxed-out credit cards, Mark continued, unbothered. 3 personal loans in default, and a lien on most of the furniture in this room. You're 90 days past due on multiple accounts. Caleb grabbed the papers, scanning wildly. This can't be right. You told me we were fine. You said the investments were paying off. Rachel stood up abruptly. They are. This is outdated. This is accurate, Mark interrupted. As of last week. She turned on him, voice rising. You had no right to look into my finances. You gave permission, he replied. When you applied for that credit line. Her eyes flicked to me. For the first time since we arrived, she looked afraid. You applied for a platinum credit line? Caleb asked quietly. Rachel swallowed. I was securing our future. You were denied, Mark said. Immediately. Caleb's shoulders slumped. He looked like someone watching a dam crack in real time. Rachel's voice sharpened. This is irrelevant. We were talking about a gift. About family. Mark folded his hands. You asked for money. We brought the truth. She scoffed, but it came out brittle. You think this humiliates me? You're just jealous. I'm not jealous, he said evenly. I'm concerned. He reached into the envelope again and pulled out another document. This is your transaction history from 5 years ago. My chest tightened. I knew that date before he said it. May 14th, Mark continued. The week my wife was hospitalized. Rachel froze. Caleb's head snapped up. That's when you said. You said you were pregnant, Mark said. 3 months along. Rachel's face twisted. I was. Mark slid the page closer to Caleb, then explained the sushi charges, the wine purchases, the weight loss clinic subscription. Caleb stared at the paper, his breathing shallow. This was when you said you were sick. When you said you lost the baby. Rachel backed away, her voice cracking. That was different. I was grieving. These aren't grief expenses, Mark said softly. They're lifestyle expenses. Caleb's hands started shaking. There was no baby. Rachel exploded. It doesn't matter. We're married now. This is ancient history. It matters, Mark said, because that lie cost someone everything. He turned to Caleb. There's one more document. He pulled out a single sheet, crisp and official. This is a liquidation order. Caleb frowned. That trust can't be touched until I'm 35. It was touched, Mark said. 6 months ago. Under a hardship claim. Caleb's eyes widened. I never signed anything. Mark pointed to the signature. Forensic review says otherwise. It matches Rachel's credit applications. Rachel screamed. I did it for us. You forged my name. Caleb whispered. You don't make enough, she snapped. Someone had to. Caleb staggered back like he'd been hit. You stole my future. Mark stood. We're done here. Rachel collapsed into hysterics. Caleb sank into a chair, staring at the wreckage of his life. Mark took my hand. We walked out. The night air felt clean. Free. Behind us, the house of illusions began to fall. The fallout didn't creep in. It detonated. By the time we reached the car, Caleb's voice was already breaking inside the house, rising in pitch, splintering into something feral. Rachel's sobs followed, sharp and performative at first, then unraveling into real panic as the illusion she'd spent years building collapsed faster than she could control. Mark didn't slow down. He didn't look back. He opened the passenger door for me with the same calm precision he used to close billion-dollar deals, then got behind the wheel and drove us away like the house behind us didn't exist. We didn't talk for several minutes. The streetlights passed in rhythmic flashes, and I focused on my breathing, grounding myself in the quiet hum of the engine. You okay? Mark finally asked. I searched for the honest answer. Vindicated, wasn't it? Relieved didn't quite fit. What I felt was absence. Like a weight I'd carried for years had been removed so gradually I hadn't noticed when it disappeared. I don't feel what I expected, I said. That's normal, he replied. Closure doesn't feel loud. The next morning, the consequences began to arrive all at once. Caleb filed for divorce before noon. He didn't call me. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. His lawyer contacted Mark's firm requesting copies of the financial documentation. By afternoon, charges were being discussed. Forgery, fraud, theft, crimes with words that don't soften no matter how you frame them. Rachel tried to control the narrative. She always did. By evening, my phone lit up with messages from extended family. Confusion first, then concern, then accusation. She says you set her up. She says your husband abused his position. She says you're trying to ruin her because you're jealous. I read them without reacting. 5 years ago, each message would have pierced me. I would have defended myself, explained, begged to be understood. This time I didn't reply. Mark noticed. You don't owe anyone an explanation, he said. I know, I answered. And for the first time, I meant it. Rachel called me 37 times over the next 2 days. I didn't block her. I wanted the reminder. Each missed call was proof that the power had shifted. She wasn't calling because she missed me. She was calling because she needed something. And for the first time in her life, I was unavailable. The villa was repossessed within 72 hours. The leased SUV disappeared from the driveway the same morning. Creditors don't wait when the curtain drops. They rush in all at once, eager to claim what's left. Caleb moved into a short-term rental near his office. His trust was gone. His reputation followed it. Architects talk. Firms remember. He wasn't the victim he imagined himself to be. Rachel was released on bail pending trial and checked into a roadside motel off the highway. The kind with flickering lights and thin walls and carpets that never quite look clean. She called again that night. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. When I finally slept, it was the first deep sleep I'd had in years. Weeks passed. The noise faded. The chaos settled into paperwork and procedures and quiet accountability. I went back to my routines. Morning runs. Coffee on the patio. Work that didn't feel like survival anymore. One afternoon, I found an old photo while reorganizing a drawer. It was from before everything fell apart. My first apartment, cheap furniture, a forced smile. I remembered how proud I'd been back then, just to be standing on my own. I realized something then. Rachel hadn't taken my husband. She hadn't taken my life. She'd taken advantage of a version of me that didn't believe she deserved better. And that version was gone. A month later, a final message came through. Not a call, not a demand, a text. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Intent doesn't erase damage. Regret doesn't rebuild trust. And apologies that arrive only after consequences aren't apologies at all. They're negotiations. That night, Mark and I sat outside, the city quiet around us, lights warm and steady. He poured 2 glasses of wine. To peace, he said. To indifference. I corrected gently. He smiled. That's stronger. He was right. Because indifference isn't cold. It's freedom. And for the first time since my phone lit up at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, my life felt entirely my own. Time did what it always does when the truth finally comes out. It stopped arguing. Rachel's trial didn't become a spectacle. There were no dramatic headlines, no viral clips. Financial crimes rarely get the attention they deserve, especially when the person committing them built their entire identity on being admired. The court proceedings were quiet, procedural, and devastating. Forgery is a boring word until it's attached to your name in permanent ink. Fraud sounds abstract until it's broken down line by line in front of a judge who isn't impressed by tears or designer shoes. Caleb testified once. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but emotionally, like someone who had aged a decade in a few months. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His voice shook when he admitted he hadn't read the paperwork he signed over the years, that he trusted her, that he believed the story because believing it was easier than questioning it. Rachel pleaded not guilty at first. That didn't last. Evidence has a way of stripping delusion bare. Bank records don't care about excuses. Signatures don't care about intent. Timelines don't bend for emotions. When her attorney finally advised her to take a plea, she agreed without looking up. The confident woman, who once walked into rooms assuming admiration, had been replaced by someone hollowed out by consequences she never thought would apply to her. She was sentenced to several years, with additional restitution she had no realistic way to pay. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had demanded money as if it were her birthright, and in the end, she would spend years paying back debts she created trying to look rich. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. Closure didn't come from watching her fall. It came from watching my own life continue without disruption. Caleb finalized the divorce quietly. He sent one email afterward. It was short. I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because forgiveness isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's simply moving on without reopening the door. Months passed. Seasons changed. The memory of that night at the villa faded into something distant, like recalling a storm after the sky has cleared. The chaos belonged to another version of my life, one I no longer lived in. One evening, while cooking dinner, I realized something had shifted without me noticing. My phone no longer made my stomach tighten. Unknown numbers didn't spike my pulse. Silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt earned. I had spent years believing strength looked like endurance. That survival meant tolerating humiliation quietly. That family bonds were obligations you paid for with pieces of yourself. I was wrong. Strength is knowing when to stop funding your own destruction. Rachel didn't lose because I exposed her. She lost because lies eventually demand payment, and she had been borrowing against the future for too long. I didn't ruin her life. I simply stopped subsidizing the fantasy she built on top of mine. Mark once asked me if I ever felt guilty. I thought about it carefully. No, I said. I feel accurate. Accuracy is underrated. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just stands there unmoved, while everything false collapses around it. On quiet nights now, I sit outside with a glass of wine, listening to the city breathe. There's no anxiety humming beneath my thoughts anymore. No invisible debt. No emotional ledger waiting to be balanced. The silence in my life isn't empty. It's settled. And if you've ever been treated like a resource instead of a person, if someone mistook your kindness for entitlement, or your silence for weakness, remember this: peace doesn't come from winning the argument. It comes from closing the account. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to support it by subscribing, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and letting others know where you're watching from. Stories like this reach people who need them because of voices like yours.